Imagine if everything we thought we knew about the White Walkers, those chilling, inhuman beings from the frozen edges of the world, was wrong. Picture a realm where the others are not the ultimate villains, but ancient custodians of balance, warped by betrayal and broken promises. It's easy to fear the cold when it creeps across the land, but fear alone doesn't always tell the whole story. In the world of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, every legend has another side, a truth buried beneath layers of history, myth, and human error. Could it be that the true monsters are not the others, but us? Long ago, before the Wall, before the Starks ruled the North, and before the Andals even set sail across the narrow sea, Westeros was a very different place. It was a land where the first men and the children of the forest lived in a tenuous peace, hard-won after generations of bloodshed. Out of their conflict, it is said, arose a pact, a sacred agreement where the first men would honor the forests and the old gods, while the children would allow them to settle parts of the land. But what if there was a second, deeper pact? One not only of land and trees, but of protection against a far greater threat. One buried in ice and shadow. The others, their chilling beauty, their inhuman grace, bear the hallmarks not of random monsters, but of beings crafted with purpose. In the myths preserved by Old Nan and whispered by the maesters, we find hints that they are not purely creatures of malevolence. They command death, yes, but also a strange form of order. They do not raise the world in chaos like dragons gone mad, or conquer for plunder like the Ironborn. Instead, their march is almost ritualistic, deliberate, almost sorrowful. Could they have once been guardians, designed by the children through ancient sorcery to defend the natural order? The story we know from the legends speaks of the long night when darkness fell and the dead rose. A hero, perhaps the last hero or Azor Ahai, led humanity against the tide, driving back the others beyond the wall. Yet the maesters are careful to note that much of this is steeped in myth, with details lost to time, and we must ask, how often in history are victors the ones to write the stories, painting themselves as saviors and their enemies as monsters? What if the pact was broken not by the others, but by humankind? Greedy, ever-expanding, and quick to forget their promises once the threat seemed distant, and the rewards of conquest too tempting. In the Weirwoods, the children of the forest preserved their ancient magics. In the cold, the others perhaps preserved something older still, a memory of balance, an agreement between species and forces. If the first men or their descendants violated that ancient agreement, cutting deeper into the land, despoiling sacred spaces, extinguishing ancient magics, then it is not hard to imagine why the others might rise again, not as invaders, but as avengers, reclaiming a world betrayed by those who had sworn to protect it. Consider the haunting symbolism that Martin weaves throughout his saga. The Weirwoods with their bleeding faces, the heart trees that see all, the ancient magic older than Valyria itself. The others are not disconnected from this ancient network of power. They seem in many ways to be its frozen mirror. Their disdain for fire, their dominion over ice, their eerie silence, all suggest they are part of a natural counterbalance to humanity's relentless drive for dominance and destruction. Fire consumes, ice preserves. Humanity creates empires but also ruins. The others, by contrast, impose a harsh, immutable order, a cold but enduring equilibrium that perhaps the world itself once depended on. When we think of the Night's Watch, sworn to hold the wall against the darkness, we often imagine a noble brotherhood standing against mindless evil. But if the Watch's original purpose was not simply defense against monsters, but enforcement of the ancient pact, then the tragedy deepens. Over the millennia, the wall's true meaning was forgotten, its ancient vows hollowed out into mere ritual. The Watch decayed from a sacred order of guardians into a motley band of outlaws and cast. Meanwhile, the others waited, bound by some ancient geese, to remain until the humans themselves broke the old compacts so thoroughly that intervention became inevitable. The wall itself, a structure so massive and so imbued with magic, was not simply built as a fortification against enemies. but perhaps as a barrier between two fundamentally different ecosystems of existence. The north, where the old gods still hold sway, remained tied to the ancient magics. The south, ruled increasingly by the faith of the Seven and later corrupted by ambition, forgot as the first men's blood was diluted, as the old ways were forsaken, as the children of the forest dwindled into legend, the reasons for the wall's existence were eroded from memory. The others, thus, became monsters in tales told to frighten children, their true purpose buried under the weight of human pride. Even their choice of weapons hints at something older and more ceremonial. They wield swords of crystal and ice, not the brutal iron of humanity's armies. Their creations, the whites, are grotesque only because they are forced to use the corpses of men. But could it be that once their powers served a more harmonious function? The whites may seem horrific, but they are not chaotic. They act with eerie precision, almost as if following an ancient mandate rather than personal malice. The others' existence is ritualistic, their movements bound by strange, half-remembered laws that no living soul truly comprehends anymore. Through this lens, the resurgence of the others is less a random apocalypse and more a tragic correction. They are the land's immune response to a world poisoned by greed, bloodshed, and broken oaths. Humanity, forgetting its ancient debts, expanding beyond its natural limits, may have doomed itself not by accident, but by centuries of willful ignorance. If this is true, then the Long Night was not merely a war between good and evil, but the terrible consequence of a cosmic betrayal. And the tragedy lies not only in the devastation it wrought, but in how thoroughly its lessons were forgotten. The songs of the North are filled with echoes of this forgotten truth. The stark words, "Winter is coming," have always been interpreted as a warning of physical hardship. Yet, what if they also carry a deeper, ancestral memory, a reminder of an ancient duty unfulfilled, a debt unpaid? The Starks, blood of the first men, wardens of the North, may have been the last mortal custodians of the pact, bound by blood and ancient oaths to remember what others forgot. Their very connection to the old gods, their dire wolves, their cold honor, all whisper of a sacred responsibility that even they, over time, could not fully grasp. Moreover, the children of the forest, those diminutive, mysterious beings who once walked freely through Westeros, are not depicted as malevolent in Martin's tales. They are protectors of nature, wielders of deep and powerful magics, but their desperation during the wars against the First Men shows that they were capable of grave mistakes. Some theories suggest that in their desperation they created the others as weapons, guardians that they could not fully control. Yet, if that creation was tied to a pact, an agreement with the early humans, then the others were not monsters unleashed, but living symbols of that sacred bargain. Guardians turned revenants when that trust was shattered. Even the persistent motif of ice and fire points toward an ancient duality, not merely a conflict. In A Song of Ice and Fire, opposites are rarely simple enemies. Dragons, creatures of fire, are awe-inspiring but devastating. Ice, represented through the others, is just as overwhelming but embodies a different kind of power: restraint, preservation, even sorrow. The story is not merely about the triumph of one over the other, but the tragic imbalance when one force, human ambition, human pride, tilts the scale beyond repair. The Dance of Dragons showed us the devastation when fire is unchecked. Perhaps the Long Night was the mirror of that lesson when ice is forgotten. In Martin's world, moral absolutes are rare. Good and evil are points of view shaped by circumstance, history, and survival. If the others once stood as guardians and became monstrous only through humanity's betrayal, then their return is not mere vengeance, it is the natural course of history correcting itself. They are not evil for the sake of evil. They are fulfilling a forgotten role, bound by the same ancient laws that humanity abandoned. In a bitter irony, their war against the living may not be conquest. It may be reparation. This possibility casts figures like Jon Snow and Bran Stark in an even more poignant light. Jon, a Stark by blood and a man who embodies duty beyond personal desire, stands between two worlds, the crumbling kingdoms of men and the forgotten truths of the North. Bran, reborn as the Greenseer, becomes a living bridge to the ancient past. They are not just warriors against an ancient enemy. They are key to remembering the pact, understanding the true history, and perhaps healing a rift as old as the world itself. Without that understanding, any victory over the others may be hollow, a postponement of a reckoning that the world itself demands. Throughout the tales of Westeros, those who meddle with forces they do not understand are often the architects of their own downfall. The Valyrians mastered dragons, but ultimately brought about their own doom. The Maesters, with their skepticism of magic, inadvertently hasten its decline, blind to the dangers that lie beyond their comfortable walls. If humanity's ancestors once made a pact with the forces of ice and then broke it, their descendants now inherit a debt they neither recognize nor believe exists. In that ignorance lies the seed of their undoing. For how can you fight what you have already wronged without even knowing the crime? The resurgence of the others is not sudden. It is a slow, inevitable tide, creeping southward as the wall's magic wanes and the ancient protections weaken. Craster's offerings, his monstrous bargains of infant sons, hint at grim echoes of the old understandings. Craster, in his twisted way, may have been honoring an ancient covenant that even he could not fully explain, maintaining a link between man and other through blood sacrifice. Yet when the Night's Watch, disgusted by his deeds, destroy him and end this cycle, it is perhaps no coincidence that the others grow bolder. With the last vestiges of the pact shattered, the Guardians awaken fully, their patience finally at an end. The others' silence is one of their most terrifying aspects. They do not parley, they do not explain. They act with cold certainty, as if following a script written in the bones of the world itself. It is tempting to interpret their silence as cruelty, but perhaps it is something far sadder, a reflection of a communication gap so wide that nothing bridges it now. If they were once capable of diplomacy, of understanding, that capacity may have been lost when the betrayal was complete. Now they speak only in ice, in death, in the slow suffocation of the world beneath snow and stillness. George R.R. Martin's world thrives on ambiguity, on the refusal to draw neat lines between heroes and villains. The others fit this pattern perfectly when viewed not as mindless destroyers, but as tragic relics of an ancient world, bound to a purpose that humanity has forgotten. They do not invade for personal gain. They do not plunder, pillage, or gloat. They simply come, and in that simple coming, they serve as a mirror to mankind's sins, a cold reminder that the world is older, deeper, and less forgiving than the petty struggles of kings and queens. If the final battle between the living and the dead is to mean anything more than mere survival, it must grapple with this buried truth. Victory over the others without understanding them would be an empty triumph, another cycle of forgetting, another betrayal in a long, sorrowful chain. To truly break the wheel, as Daenerys dreams, to forge a new world, the living must confront not only the others, but also their own history, their own broken promises, their own role in summoning the storm. Only then can there be a future where balance, not domination, reigns once more. In the end, perhaps the true horror is not the others themselves, but the realization that humanity has forgotten the very agreements that once kept the world whole. The others are not devils conjured from malice, but the embodiment of memory, the world's memory, of oaths broken and balances shattered. Their march south is not conquest for glory, but a reckoning, a final accounting written in frost and sorrow. And in facing them, humanity must confront the ancient truth it buried in favor of crowns, thrones, and fleeting glories. George R.R. Martin's world has always been one where history bleeds into myth, where truths are twisted by time until only shadows remain. If the others were once the rightful stewards of winter, humanity's betrayal of them is a betrayal not just of an ancient pact, but of nature itself. In forgetting the old ways, in forsaking the old gods and the old promises, men severed themselves from the forces that once kept the world in delicate balance. Now, with the cold winds rising and the long night falling once again, the past returns, not as a story, but as judgment. Jon Snow's journey, his struggle between duty and love, honor and necessity, becomes even more tragic in this light. His fate is not merely to defend the living, but perhaps to heal the rift between ancient promises and modern amnesia. Likewise, Bran Stark's transformation into the three-eyed raven suggests that understanding, not violence, may be the true key. Only by seeing the full tapestry of history, not the fragments, not the myths, but the painful, buried truths, can any lasting peace be forged. Otherwise, the cycle will begin anew, as it has before. If humanity once broke faith with the Guardians of the Cold, then the final war is not merely for survival, but for redemption. A second chance to honor the pacts forgotten, to acknowledge the sins of the past, and to rebuild a world where ice and fire do not destroy each other, but coexist once again in balance. It is a choice between remembrance and obliteration, between humility and hubris. And as ever in Martin's world, it is not a certainty that the right choice will be made. So when the cold winds howl and the dead march, we must ask, are the others truly the enemy? Or are they the consequence? The inevitable, sorrowful answer to a question humanity long ago forgot how to ask. In the end, the greatest tragedy may not be their coming, but that no one remembers why they come at all.